All right, so I'm just going to dive right on in. So guys, this first question here is for the whole panel. So if I'm a VR company that's looking to raise money right now, what are some of the most important questions that I really need to be prepared to be answering?
For me, the biggest one is around the market. You know, who's going to buy it? If you're building a product that you expect to sell to millions of people to be a successful business, then I'd really want to know, how do you know that millions of people are going to have VR, and be buying apps in the amount of runway that you're trying to raise?
So I'm shake it up a little bit and actually disagree with somebody on the panel.
All right.
Already, it's Thursday. Why not? So if I'm a VR company, I think that there's a handful of investors who have taken the plunge. That are bought into the premise of the market being there, the market being large eventually. So for me, a VR company needs to be prepared to demonstrate why their particular thesis or idea, concept, technology is competitive in the market, and most importantly, why they're the team to execute. So what particular passion do they have, and what do they see that can sustain them through this this period of not having a market, really? So that's what I want to hear from an entrepreneur is why they have this burning passion to see this dream come to reality.
Okay, so hi everyone, Tipatat. My response to that would be, of course, this is what I ask everyone, why in VR? Is what you're doing better or transformative? Is it slightly better, is it additive, or does this really make a huge difference for what you're trying to solve or what you're trying to accomplish? And if the answer is, it's not transformative, then think of something else or work on something greater. The other thing I would say too is, why now? And this kind of talks to what Matt and both Jeff were kind of talking about, but is what you're building something that's going to drive VR adoption? Because that's what we need right now. We don't need ideas that, once 10 million people have VR, then you can make a couple pennies off of those people. We have to think about, okay, is the problem you're solving worth $3,000? Because you have to justify not just your software application, but buying all the hardware too.
I'd say I think it's really tough to time the market, and for me there are two important things. I'm generally an A round, B round investor, so my view is two things. One, do you have a unique solution or a unique use case that the big guys can't build? So I'm talking the big technology companies, and you have the capabilities to actually do it really well. And secondly is, do you have a practical path to business model? And granted, it's far away, but do you have certain options that are practical that you'll be able to execute on? So I think for me at least, those are the two important things.
So when you're looking at the VR and AR landscape right now, are there types of investments that you're saying no to specifically, kind of flat out?
Sure, that one's super easy. I mean, the most obvious one is definitely like service-oriented production studios, like people that, these are great businesses. They can make, good profit, valuable businesses to have, but they aren't venture scalable businesses. So, we meet a lot of people like, they do great client work for Coke or, Pepsi, building AR or VR experiences for them. Is that necessarily a VR investable company? For us, we would say no. And in the same way, too, that falls under a lot of like great production studios that are doing cool, VR, like 360 video content. Great companies, but not necessarily investable ones.
I'll add to that. I think for me, hardware is tough, mainly because you need to have a supply chain, which you can't unless you've worked on it over the last few years. So for me, that would be one where it'll be tough from a value proposition perspective coming to us for a potential investment.
We're, I guess, saying no generally to companies that are doing media, content, or gaming, not necessarily because you can't build a good business there, but more our partnership. We don't have a lot of experience in that space, and to the earlier question about the market, we're not really confident enough that there's going to be a big market there. So we're looking at more pure technology companies or enterprise solutions.
I agree.
So
one other thing, sorry, I'd just like to add too. I would say no to a lot of companies because there's a lot of companies trying to do the same thing. And I feel like, like every now and then, like last year everyone was trying to be the YouTube of VR when everyone knew YouTube was going to be the YouTube of VR, or Facebook would be the YouTube of VR. But now I feel like there's a lot of people trying to solve like smaller problems. That like content management systems. Okay, there's a lot of 360 video out there. Oh, I can package you an app that will let you, make a downloadable 360, share your 360. I feel like I see a ton of those. And it's hard to differentiate. It's hard to pick a winner. And I don't know how big that opportunity is. And in the same way, when I come here and I look at, in the AR space, there's so many people still, now that Matta's out of the space and it's really Vuforia and there are a couple other small, but there's so many people trying to build these platform, AR, SDKs, and it's like, it's hard when a lot of you are building off of similar like open source, OpenCV tech, and you haven't had a breakthrough that really gets you head and shoulders above the competition. And so the way I evaluate those companies when you're in a competitive space, you have to make sure you can't be just slightly better in certain use cases. You have to be transformatively better, like heads and shoulders, no question, better.
So I think VR's got a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem with content, right? You've got the hardware out there, but you need more content in order to drive people to continue to use it. But obviously, as well, with a smaller market, it's hard to find value as an investor in investing in content. So, what do you think is the best route for the content creators in the VR space to start, seeking some capital?
Try and get capital from customers. Tipatat said the sort of agency services type of businesses aren't really good businesses for a VC to invest in, but they can be great businesses for an entrepreneur to pursue while they build their product and discover where the market is. So that, off the top of my head, that's probably the advice I'd give.
The one I'd add to is there's a lot of opportunity for content funding that didn't exist like 1 or 2 years ago. The platform companies realized this. So, Vive has just created the Vive X program, which invests in companies, but also specifically content companies looking to fund content. Oculus does the same. I know Google does the same. And there's going to be more and more of these opportunities popping up. And then even now, the difference between where we were a year ago, there are consumer products now. And there might not be a lot, but we do see enough. So we're tracking the first month of Steam sales. We're estimating somewhere between $1 million to $2 million in software sales, which doesn't sound like that much, but considering how few headsets there are, that's actually pretty good. And it's one of those things where if you design smartly, if you're a small indie studio, don't even come to us for funding. Build something, have the right kind of budget for it, but then put it out there, and you can see, $1,000, $100,000 sales within the first month or two. That's the appetite that's out there.
And I'd say if you're doing something in content, really try to do something different, because it may be that there's not a lack of content, but there's a lot of similar content. So people see one thing, they see another thing that's very similar. I argue that we haven't had that aha moment in VR yet. We don't really know what success looks like. So to break through, experiment, continue to play with what the technology can do, push the boundaries, and understand that when that breakthrough occurs, retroactively it's going to look very easy. It's like, aha, that's the way you do it in VR. That's what the medium's capable of. And so I think that people that are following the formula of today, thinking that that's the formula of success, is wrong, because the content that's out there, a lot of it, like Tipatat said, is pretty good, but it's not getting the repeat use, it's not getting the share, it's not getting people to go out and spend $3,000 to get their whole setup. So do something great. Sorry.
One thing I'd like to add too, you look at what's out there and what's really people are kind of latching onto, or people are most excited about. Like, I think everyone, hands down, if you've tried the Vive, you've probably tried budget cuts, and you've probably thought, holy crap, this is awesome. And it wasn't about having the highest production value, being the most visually compelling. It was about smart design and using VR to do something new and creative. And that was developed by a team of two. And they created something profound that big teams can't do because they think and design differently. I think Stress Level Zero is also another great example of a small indie team, a little bigger than a team of two, but also thinking about development in the right way. And so I would follow those examples as opposed to saying, don't try to be an EA and say, hey, we're going to spend $2 million, 30-person team, and we're going to build this awesome VR game that's going to launch in 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm. looking at Tipatat, you have spent a lot of time in Tiltbrush recently creating a lot of content. Can you speak to maybe the importance of user-generated content in driving VR's adoption?
I think a lot of this too, the content problem, how do we solve the content problem? Well, if we enable average people to build content, then that kind of solves itself. And so I think Tiltbrush is a great example. Even things like the Wave, I don't know if you guys seen that, but it's like a DJ performance and music creation tool in VR. But these are what I think will help drive the industry and also bring about different adoption. Right now, I think so many people are focused on, VR as gaming, but people that fall in love with Tiltbrush, they're like, I'm not a gamer, but man, I love VR because of what Tiltbrush lets me do. And so I think thinking about those opportunities and how that can democratize content creation is really powerful and will drive this industry forward.
Over the last 2 years, I've seen quite a bit of changes in the VR and AR space, and I'm sure that you all have as well. What have been some of the biggest takeaways, and what is the biggest difference now that the headsets are out on the consumer market?
Well, I think it's the maturity of the market itself, right? So I think one biggest challenge today is distribution. And I think a lot of companies have learned from that. And one of the key takeaways, at least for me, was companies that have found unique use cases that are either targeting a specific niche or a specific set of verticals, be it education or be it entertainment, have been able to sustain their business much longer than a lot of others. So I think key takeaway for me has been what's that unique solution or use case that you've been able to develop, and from an overall hardware or HMD perspective has been obviously the distribution still not there, but when it is there, how will you be able to capitalize on that?
So I've been doing AR now for 6 or 7 years, and the last 2 years has just been completely different to everything up to now. And the biggest changes, I guess, I've seen in that time is the amount of money pouring into the industry. Prior to Facebook buying Oculus, the sort of deals, the sort of projects were $1 million was a lot of money, and now like every one of the major players is investing billions into the space, and there's funds like ours that didn't exist a couple of years ago. So what that's resulted in is a lot of problems that were just so hard that seemed out of reach are now being really solved. We're seeing products like the HoloLens come out, which is just the fact that it exists and it works is amazing. And we're seeing most of the other big companies working on really interesting stuff that prior to this amount of investment coming into the space just would have been decades away. So that's been huge.
I think one of the changes that I've seen that I think is pretty profound, over the last year, HTC has done a great job getting hardware to developers, and Oculus less so. And I don't know all the rational reasons for that, but because a great number of developers have access to the hardware and software tools from HTC, they're creating really compelling experiences. The Wave, Tiltbrush, Sculptor VR, Realities.io. Those are the demos that I see people get into in VR and have that wow, I'm sold, where's my money? And Oculus releasing with an Xbox controller has hurt the industry, I believe. I've had limited partners of our fund that didn't really like VR or weren't sold that it was going to be a thing. Read the New York Times review, the Wall Street Journal review of that box and say, yeah, it's not that good. Yeah, you got to wait till you see the new stuff. Like, okay, we'll wait. But that's a problem for the rest of us in the industry is we don't want to wait because we know that it's here. So I think that fundamentally, HTC has brought a lot more people to the party, and that's when real creative explosion occurs. So the app stores on mobile, when it was just Apple creating apps for the iPhone, they were okay, but they weren't that compelling. It was not until you had thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of developers releasing and unlocking that creativity that the big mobile businesses like Uber were built. So we're at that gestation point, and I think that that's really fundamentally what's driving the VR market over the next 6 to 12 months.
The one thing too that I'd want to add to that, and agree with what everyone said so far, is just daydream and how important it's going to be to actually have high quality mobile VR for more people. So, again, they're at a spec that will bring Gear VR Plus because now they have real input and be able to make mobile VR more than just watching 360 video. And that's going to be huge and have profound ramifications for not just getting, a couple million people into VR, but getting hundreds of millions of people into VR. And so I think if you think about scaling, you think about all that represents, Google more than doubling down, quadrupling down on VR and announcing Daydream and being very serious about it is going to be great for the industry.
So, springboarding off of that, Tip, to the rest of the panel, in the next year, which market do you think is more important to VR, mobile or desktop? And do you see that changing over the next 5 years?
I'll jump in. So I think in the near term, in my view, it's desktop, and I think the early adopters will be a good judge of that. Longer term, I think more of the casual consumers will lean towards mobile, and that's where the market will head. But in the near term, the key is to make sure the early adopters are happy with the experiences that we have in the market, and through that, I think we'll get the market to jumpstart, and then that's when you start to see, VR getting into a little bit of mainstream after that.
Well, I'll disagree. I definitely think in terms of being most important, it's definitely mobile over the next year. Certainly for developers and for the early adopters, you're going to still get the best experience on a desktop, and so you're going to probably see more nicer things come out on the desktop. But the work that's going into mobile, and Daydream's an example, but all the big mobile players are kind of hammering on this. That's going to ultimately result in the types of VR and AR products that are going to be on hundreds of millions of people's shopping lists. So I just think the future of VR and AR ultimately is mobile, and any work that's going on to make that happen sooner is the most important work that can be done.
So again, I would actually say this depends on who you are and who you're targeting, right? Like, I feel like one of the biggest announcements lately, following the news, that AOL and Huffington Post acquired Riot, a VR journalism company. New York Times has been pushing out VR content. If you're a media business and you want to do something for VR, I think mobile makes more sense, and that's who you should be looking at and targeting. But then, if you're a company that's trying to build something for the enterprise and trying to change the way that people work or communicate and collaborate, then I think you really want to be on a high-end system, because what you want to do is build something that's so profoundly unique and empowering, and right now that the mobile technology just isn't there yet.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, maybe a distinction to be made, because otherwise I would disagree with the disagreement. And now I'm lost. I don't even know what we're talking about. But VR isn't just one thing. I mean, there isn't a VR. VR is a technology or a set of technologies that facilitate business uses in business cases. So very much so, to Tipatat's point, it depends on what you do, what will drive the market. But from my perspective, I do believe that desktop drives it, because I've got a secret weapon, and she's a 14-year-old daughter and a gaggle full of teenage girls, and they try out a lot of VR for me. They can play with the Gear VR, but they don't need it. They still need their phones because their friends are on the other side of the phones. But put them in Space Pirate Trainer, and they say, when can that Gear VR do something like that? Right? So they want better technology. They want it to do the things that the high-end systems can do, and I think that's the Christmas present that kids want. So to the extent that teenagers are an important market, having high-end experiences is very good. I think the number one thing we could do is put 2 HTC Vives in every middle school in the country, and then make them demand from their parents that they get that for Christmas. Just a thought. Just a thought.
I'll cheers to that. So, a lot of talk around VR is around the gaming side of things, and especially as it's getting into consumers' hands these days. But in the next year, what vertical do you think has the largest potential for revenue growth? Is it gaming?
All right, I'll jump in. I think the near term, yes. I think if we're talking the next 12 months, it'll likely be entertainment. We might see some interesting, compelling experiences in hospitality. But if you were to push that question and say, hey, longer term, once there's enough distribution out there, what are some interesting verticals? I love education as an example, mainly because in education, there's a huge gap in value and experience that VR can bring to it. And that's really what's going to drive innovation in that vertical when you start to apply VR as a technology in that space.
Yeah, we've been talking for 20 minutes and PlayStation VR hasn't come up yet. So to the extent that they're successful this year, then in the next 12 months, I do believe that gaming will drive the market for sure.
I agree. And also thinking about location-based gaming as well, like, the void that these VR arcades, especially in Asia, there's going to be, Shunhuan committed to putting HTC in 100,000 VR arcades in China, right? So you're going to see a lot of opportunity to monetize gaming on that scale in those kind of arenas where we might not have huge penetration in the US, but 100,000 internet cafes, that's 10 million audience that they can reach.
So earlier this year at the Vision Summit, John Riccatello spoke to a potential gap of disappointment where there would be initial slower growth curve for VR that would be met with sort of rile from the press. If I'm a startup looking to raise today, what are some ways that I can manage to sort of float through that gap?
Run lean. Yeah. Ultimately, that's what it's about. You've got to keep money in the bank until your market appears. I definitely agree that there will be a trough of disappointment ahead. In terms of our partnership, I'm generally the most skeptical about how quickly things are going to happen. So if you are a startup and you're raising around, be really conservative about how long that round is going to last you, and probably cut your forecasts in half of what you think you're going to accomplish in that time. And we're all kind of punting on the market right now, so until we know, be cautious with how you spend your money.
If you have money, agreed, to stay alive, don't die. That's what we tell our companies at Boost VC. We've got 34 in the portfolio, so I talk to a lot of CEOs, and money is always a big deal. To get money, though, what do you do to get money in a market that's not here yet? And I think that's to show how you have a competitive advantage, how your technology differentiates in the marketplace, and then to understand what milestones you can reach in a specified amount of time. So it may not be revenue, it may not be customers, it may be technical development, it may be team build-out, it may be partnerships with corporations. Whatever those milestones are that can really unlock value, measure that. Go after those things, because if investors can measure that progress, and they can see that you've delivered upon what you said, that's a good sign for a team because they can execute.
And the one thing for me, and this is more philosophical, but just build something great. Not just good, but great. And what does that mean? It has to be something that when someone comes out of it, their life is transformed. And it doesn't matter if there's no investment. If you build something that great, it'll find a way to exist. And if you're finding investors not coming to your idea, then do something different. Your idea sucks.
So we're running low on time, so this is probably going to have to be the last question. The Chinese VR market has been getting a lot of attention lately with Tencent, Huawei, Baofeng, and more betting big on the medium. What are some of the unique opportunities in the AR and VR spaces that you're seeing in that market?
So we already talked about the whole idea of location-based VR and arcades. We feel like for high-end VR, that's really going to be where it really makes entryways into the audience. They don't have the same kind of PC adoption rate and even the same kind of PS4 console adoption rate in China and in the rest of Asia as well. And so those are going to be the right entryways, but you have to find a partner. That's the thing about China specifically, and there's a lot of people that are going to be out there offering to be a partner, and it's hard to differentiate between who's real and who's not. It takes a lot of work, but finding the right partner makes the biggest difference in success in Asia. But I would say focus on the US now. China will be the biggest market eventually, But for now, really, the U.S. and rest of the world is. I would focus in your home territory, conquer that first, and then bring it to the rest of the world.
Yeah, tip it up on that. I mean, before I got into VR and AR, I worked in mobile for a long time and sort of ran the Asia Pacific region. So VR is similar to mobile in that way. Definitely conquer your own market. You need to treat China in particular as a completely separate, separate universe. And you're not going to succeed there as an American company or wherever you're from just to drop in and get success. You need someone locally who understands that market as a local and who you can completely trust. And it is quite difficult to find that.
One other way too, just like Jaunt recently announced that they did a JV, a joint venture with a Chinese entity to help bring Jaunt to China. So they realized it's not them doing it
You
themselves.
often have to. That's actually a legal requirement. You're obligated to set up a joint venture if you want to set up business in China, which complicates things even further.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much for coming today, and thank you all so much for showing up.